Howdy. Here you are at Andy's place. Welcome and come on in. Grab you a chair, pull up, sit a spell. We'll tell you what this is all about. Some time ago, I got to wondering what my grandfathers were like. I never knew either one. The only one that I never knew of my grandparents was my grandmother on my mother's side. And she passed away when I was about 12 years old. Now, these two grandfathers came to this country in 1882, which was 7 years before Washington was declared a state. It was just a territory. My grandfather on my dad's side, Andrew Anderson, came directly from Finland and settled up in the foothills. Grandfather Fenton came from Germany, circulated down through Nevada country, California, then came out and settled in the Pleasant Prairie area, which is about 10 miles from the foothills. Now, at that time, they were both eligible to homestead land. The government would give each person that wanted to homestead 160 acres if they would improve it, build on it, and make a home and plow the ground and raise crops and so forth. And that is what each of these two grandfathers did. If I didn't know anything about either one of them, I have no way, I will never know. That's past history now. Matter of fact, I really didn't know what my dad was interested in and what he did as a young fella, as a kid growing up, what his likes and dislikes were. So the reason for this documentary, I got to thinking that maybe down the line, 10, 20 years or 30, maybe my grandkids or my great-grandkids or great-great-grandkids may wonder what this old cowboy was like in his growing up years. So I was tempted to put it down, and will so try to do at this time. I feel rather good that I was born on my grandfather Anderson's homesteaded land in the house that my dad and mother built in 1914. And I was born in 1916 on the place there, not coming to town. But my mother said at the time that was the first and last one that she would have out in the country like that. Because it ended up almost died herself and almost lost me. So I have three sisters and a brother, and they were all born in Spokane instead of out at the place. I have a brother Dale, older sister Edith, a middle sister Leone, and a baby sister Grace, who at this time are still in Spokane here and still living. But getting back to myself, I remember about 4 years of age. Remember anything prior to that? But at 4 years, I can remember something about my folks. I especially remember the horses that my dad had on his farm there. Seemed like those horses had a special interest for me. I just really enjoyed them, and I would spend most of my time around those horses. Couldn't wait to get big enough so I could get out and work those horses, drive them over the fields, and so forth. And that did come in time. In fact, I think I got started rather young at doing that. Seemed like I never was a kid too long. So even at 8 years old, I was in the field working those horses, following a foot burner, which is a single furrow plow with two handles on it that you walk behind with two horses pulling and rolling over the dirt as you go along with it. And then hitching to the harrow which was probably 6, 7, 8 feet wide, and harrowing and smoothing this ground down. This was known actually as dirt farming, and the longer I got into it, the worse I hated it. My interests at the time were in livestock and cattle and horses and hay. Those are the things that I like to do, which my father's place was not fitted for that, nor was he interested in that. So I had a little bit of a time around home there, putting in my time working, but still dreaming about the cattle country and horse country and so forth like that. About 8 years of age, my dad had a hired man come to help with harvesting there. And he was a young guy, about 22, 3, 4, 5 years old. Name was Virgil Beaver. He came out of Montana. And he was kind of roaming the country around, and he kind of took a liking to me, and the same for me. And that was the first time that I found out what cowboys were and what they did and so forth. And, so, of course, he came out of Polson, Montana, which is horse country, cow country. And I would question him and ask him questions about these things, and he was explaining to me what a cowboy was. He said a cowboy, his first interest was in horses. And not only interest, he had to have a hand with them and be able to handle horses, break them when necessary, and take care of them. Yet be able to ride and like to ride and like to be around horses. That was the main cause right there. I guess the cow part of the cowboy came from the fact that you didn't work altogether with horses. You were working with cattle. And whether it was range cattle, dairy cattle, or whatever, it was all part of it. So a cowboy's life did not enter into on a horse and off of a horse. That was part of it, and that's really the main way that he went. Riding the fence line was definitely done on horseback. And he always said that a cowboy chased a horse a quarter of a mile to ride 3 blocks. And that was kind of true. But you get into the cattle part of it, and the cowboys had to ride the range or dairy herds or whatever, checking on the stock. And if he found one that was hurt or had a problem, it was up to him to do it. So he had to be actually part veterinary, even to the point of helping an old cow deliver a calf. That was not unusual at all. And of course, there was always the branding and the deal in the springtime there, tagging and marking the calves, castrating the bulls, and then putting them out on pastures. This is the part that really interested me, was these range cattle. So there was no chance to our place there. I did get a chance to pick up all the calves I could use from the local dairies just for going and getting them. At that time, they didn't want them. They couldn't even bring $1 a head. So at one time, I had the horse barn half full of calves. And finally, my dad raised my tail with me about that I had to get rid of them because we didn't have pasture for them, we didn't have milk and so forth. But I thought I could make it go, but it didn't. Anyway, after this, Virgil Beaver finished and we was going home. He was a real nice guy. My mother took a liking to him, and she found out that he had not been home in 4 or 5 years. His parents, his mother, was still living in Polson. So she got him to agree that we would go, Dad and I, and take him home, which is a pretty long trip in those days. You got to go up to Missoula and then head north into Folsom Country. But we did that, and that was the first time that I really got a chance to look over cattle country, cowboy country, if you like, horse country. So that was a learning experience. And of course, then when I got home, first thing that I hit my dad up for was a saddle horse. But he couldn't see it that way, and I couldn't see his viewpoint, but I do now and could see it later. Having another horse on the place, just a saddle horse, meant so much ground had to be used to raise feed for that cayuse that wouldn't be any good for working. He always told me, just use one of the workhorse. Well, you could, but it wasn't the same. So anyway, this went on for a while, and I came home from school one day, and my friend came with me. We came in the house. My mother had fresh biscuits. She just baked, so she fixed us up with fresh biscuits and fresh butter on it and a glass of milk. And I asked, I said, would you mind, could I go over to so-and-so's place there for a little while? He said, yes, that'd be all right. But Dad says, first, would you go in the woodshed and bring me that hammer? He said, it's laying on the chopping block in there. So I run out to open the door, which the door never was closed before, but it was today. I didn't think too much about it, so I opened the door and I busted in there, and lo and behold, there was about the prettiest little sorrel pony I think I ever saw. And I couldn't believe it. And I run back in the house, and I said, Dad, I said, there's a little pony in the woodshed out there. What's it doing in there? And he says, well, that's your pony now. And I just absolutely couldn't believe that. So, boy, I tell you, I got that pony out. And so, forgot about the other friend of mine, or maybe we rode to his place. Anyhow, 4 or 5 days after getting that pony, I came home from school one day, and my dad says, I got to talk to you about that horse. Oh? He said, I'll tell you the story. He says, that horse was found by the pound master and kept in the pound for 30 days and was never claimed by the owner. So that allowed him to sell that horse. And he says, I bought the horse and paid for it. The horse is yours. But he said, this is a story behind it there. He says, I run into this old fellow that lived up beyond, up in the foothills there. And he heard that I bought this little horse. And he came to see about it. And this is the way it goes. He says, he's the old bachelor up there, and that's his only mode of transportation. The only way he's got to get grocery stuff back up to his place up there. And he was wondering if there was any chance of getting that little horse back. Him and that horse were just like that. And so I thought about it for a while, and I guess maybe you know the answer. He got his little horse back. And so then, like the proverbial hoop goes around, comes around. Just a few weeks after that, perhaps, came an auction flyer. We used to get them in the mail. It was about this wide in there. There were quite a lot of auctions in those days. So lo and behold, in the bottom of this auction bill was one saddle horse and a saddle. And I showed that to my dad, and I says, my gosh, I says, do you suppose we could go down there? It's on the own, just up where I live now, and see about that horse. He says, yeah, we can go down. So we started down. He says, how much do you think we should pay for the horse? I said, well, I don't know. I said, we'll have to wait and see. Well, we got down there early, and I saw that horse. Of course, that was really the horse that I wanted. So I tell you, on those auction sales, the livestock was the last thing that sold. So I spent the longest day, I think, in my life, from that morning until 4 in the afternoon till I got to that horse. But it was well worth it because Dad bought the horse for $6 and the saddle for $2. And I'm telling you, that was a little Indian cayuse, and I don't know who trained that horse, but that was the best cow horse I ever threw the leg across. And I rode quite a few good horses in my time, but that one had to be the best. She was a cutting horse. All you had to do is point her at whatever you wanted her to do, and I mean, she delighted in working at it. It wasn't that she was doing something she had to. And when those old cows would move out, I mean, she'd sink her teeth right into the back end. Wonderful little horse. Hardest to catch thing though in the world. Back first time I went to catch her after we got her home, she drove me through the fence. Never had a horse do that. Came at me with ears back and mouth open. Boy, I tell you, I was scared. So I went and told my dad, and he came down. And he took a halter chain. He walked in there, and she came at him. And he just laid back with that halter chain when she got almost up to it. And he came down across, caught her right behind the ear, cold cocked her right there. She just stretched out on the ground. I thought, boy, he'd killed her. But he went over and he snapped the halter chain into the halter and stood there for a little bit. Pretty soon she got up, shook her head. He could catch her after that, but it was years before I could go in there and brave enough to stand up to that horse. But finally the day came that I did, and they were having trouble after that. But she was a really good horse. Wasn't a very big horse, but I'm telling you, that sucker could run. And to work cattle with her. The reason I got her, I had kind of made a deal with some of the local dairies around there to work their cattle for them. In those days, with the dairy herd, they had a pasture that they put these cows on, but they couldn't put them out and leave them out there like you would range cattle. So I'd have to herd them cows. Maybe you've heard the term herding cows is actually what it was. I'd have to herd this bunch of cows down onto the pasture land, say for 2 hours, 2.5 or 3, whatever, and then ride through them, making sure everything was okay, and that one of them didn't bloat. That was a common thing in those days, you know. The cow get greedy and start chewing down. If one got like that, I'd have to bring her back in right away. And speaking about bloating, you got a cow that really bloated sometimes. They had a little tool about that long with a handle on it, a sharp point, and they called it a trocar. So if you had a cow that was really blowed up, you know, that was just dying from the gas inside, you'd have to go up, and I think it's between the 7th and 8th rib now, I forget, 6th or 7th. But you get that trocar up on her back, and you bam it down through between 2 ribs into her stomach, then pull this pointed deal out and left this like a tube in there. Oh, boy, would the gas ever roll out of there. You couldn't hardly stand the smell of it, you know. But we done that to save cows when they got to the point where they had to be. Anyway, getting back to herding the cows, I'd herd them back in and then go over to the next place. There was 2 dairy farmers not too far apart, and then I'd do the same thing with the other ones. I got along pretty good that way. It was learning, of course, more about it there. So this one place that I worked at had a big old Guernsey bull. In fact, this was a Guernsey herd of cows. The Guernsey herd is kind of in between the Jersey and the Holstein. Holstein is a high volume milker, and the Jersey was a smaller amount, but much richer. The Guernsey was kind of in between, and a good dairy cow. So he had an old Jersey or Guernsey bull that he kept there for breeding purposes. I don't know why, but I learned early in life never to trust one of those devils. No further than I could throw him by his tail. And of course, that's not very far.
So I was home one day, and this boss called up mother, and he says, "He's about there." She said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Tell him to get his saddle horse and come down here." He said, "I need him." So I caught my horse, rigged him out, rode over there. I see the hay wagons were upset, looked like a cyclone went through the barnyard. The manure spreader, great big heavy manure spreader, was sitting upside down. And he was out there, and I came up and I says, "What's happened? What's going on here?" He said, "Oh, guy," he said, "the old bull went nuts, I guess. He went crazy." Well, I know that when those bulls do that, or get that point, their eyes get as red as a red coal out of a fireplace. And when they go that way, I don't know what it is, they lose everything. And they've got the strength of, oh, who knows. But anyway, I said, "Well, where is he?" And he said, pointed down the meadow. He says, "Down there in the meadow." And I said, "Well, what do we do?" And he said, "Well, you got to go get him." I'm a kid, about 9 years old, 10 years old, first time out. Oh boy, that guy was just tearing up the meadow. I mean, he had horns like that. He'd stick that horn into the ground and he'd run along there just like a plow, and he was bellering, and pawing the ground. So, well, guess I have to. So I started to go, and he says, "You take this pitchfork along with you." He says, "I think you might need that." I said, "Okay." So I started down there, and I got down to where the bull could see me coming. He was just like, "Come on, buddy, I'm waiting for you. Just come on in. I'll take care of you in short order." So I rode in there, and I noticed my little horse, her ears were right up, and oh, I'm telling you, she was watching that dude. So we rode up to him, pretty close to him, and put him down. His head went, and here he come. Well, I just let her do what she knew to do, and she just sidestepped him, and he breezed on by. Surprised that he didn't knock us down. Turned around, bellered some more, and came back. And that time, I got a little more familiar with the thing, and as he went by, I jammed him in the rear end with a pitchfork. And that, of course, startled him somewhat, but didn't take the fight out of him. So he turned around, and he comes back again after that. And then so this little course I was on, thank God it was her that knew what was doing her. I wouldn't be here today, because he'd have hit me and her hard enough. We'd been flying yet. So anyway, keep doing this, and I'd get a jab on him every chance that I could. And so, he got a little tired of that, and he didn't come at us so much. And then I got him started to the barn, and I rode right up behind him, jabbing him with that pitchfork all the way to the barn. We got him into the barn, into the corral there, and got him in. Of course, he had a big ring in his nose. We hooked him onto that ring in the nose, and then wedged him up into a stanchion and got his head locked in there. And then this boss, he took a handsaw and he went after his horns, and he cut those horns right off. Oh, what a mess. Or to hold that big in his head. And I could look down in there, and I guess see his brains and whatever was in there. But I'll tell you, that definitely took the fight out of that guy. And I had a few more experiences I'll get into later on with those things. And then I knew I would never trust one any further than I could throw him by his tail. So that's how that went. Then after 1 year, I had a chance to go work on a stock ranch. And my dad wasn't too happy about it, because he sure did need me there to cultivate those darn spuds and weed them and so forth. But I worked hard at home all the time, so I didn't figure I was stealing too much away from him. So I started out one Sunday morning. My mother fixed me a little lunch, and I tied my clothes on behind the saddle. Started out about, I think I was 12 years old that year. And I rode clear across, down Trentwood, across the valley, over past Liberty Lake, up the other side. This ranch that was up there was a stock ranch, dairy and range cattle.
and a hay ranch. And so I got up there just by dark that day, which is quite a long ride there. And so it was out in the morning, of course, at 4 o'clock. Go out, bring in the dairy cows, milk them. By that time, it's breakfast, and then it was off to the fields for cutting hay and so forth like that. So there was a big old black bull, white-faced bull with big horns on to it. And he kind of roamed between the range cattle and the dairy cows. He kind of took care of all of them there. And he'd follow the dairy cows into the barn, and while we were milking them, he would stand around out there chewing his cud, wait for her to get out of the barn so they go back to meadow. Well, he was my second experience with a bull. One night we were sitting at the table, supper table, heard this noise, this thundering noise. And it was in the summertime, it had been no clouds. I looked up, the sky was as clear as could be. But this roaring noise, this thundering noise comes. I run out there and I run up by the barn just in time to see this old black bull walk up to a barbed wire fence and didn't even bend his head. He walked right through it. And those staples just flew and those wires got tight as a banjo string and it just hung. So through the fence he went and down the road heading out into Idaho. So I came back and told the boss. He says, the old bull's gone. He's took off. Well, he says, we go get him in the morning. I said, who's going to go get him? He said, well, you are. I had that experience with that other bull, and I didn't know if I wanted another one, but I had to do it. I was a hired guy there. The next morning, I got this same little horse that I had, and we went trailing that bull's tracks. We trailed him clear up, guys, well into Idaho. It must have been 4 or 5 miles back in there, and I finally came to a kind of a stump rancher up there, and he was out in the yard there, and I stopped, told him who I was, asked him if he'd seen a big black bull. He said, oh yeah. I said, do you know where he is? He says, yeah. Well, I said, where is he? He says he's up in the pasture up there now with my herd. Well, I says, I gotta get him. He said, just leave him here for a few days. I think he had visions of use in him, breeding for me. And I said, no, I can't do it. I said, the boss sent me after him, and I said, I gotta take that dude back. Well, he says, if you're able to leave him, he said, I guess you'll have to do it. And I said, well, if I bring the herd down here and cut him out, will you open the gate so I can get him started? He said, yeah, if you ain't going to leave him, I'll do it. So I brought the whole herd down. Cut him out of the herd and started down the road. He's trotting along there just like a little dog, you know. Oh, this is going to be easy, you know. He started towards me. You know, he got about 300 yards down the road, and I tell you, he let out a beller that would shake the mightiest trees up there. The ground even shook. He reared up his hind legs, and he put his head down, and he came back. And I'm trying to head that dude off. Well, this little horse, like I said, is a lot smarter than I was. She stood her ground as long as she could, and then she sidestepped just as he went by, and he hit my foot as he went by, and damn near flipped me off the horse. So he went right back and threw the fence in with the guy's herd. So I told the guy, I says, I can't get him. I says, I'm just going to have to let him there for now and see. The guy says, fine, just leave him here. He'll be all right. So I got home, and the boss says, find a bull? And I said, yeah. He said, where is he? I said, he's up in Idaho, up there in the ranch. God, he said, why did you bring him home? He said, that's why you went up there. And I said, well, I tried, but he said, I couldn't get him. He said, oh, heck. So anyway, we were haying and busy out in the field. So we were sitting at the table one night again eating supper when I heard this
bellowing noise come along. I ran up there, and here comes the old bull down this trail. Walked right through the fence. I says, well, the old bull is back. So that meant we didn't have to go get him. So the next morning, 4 o'clock, I got up. I had to run quite a ways to where I had my horse in a little pasture down there to get her to ride out and get the dairy cows. I ran down there, and I'm trying to corner that horse. And like I said before, the hardest goddamn horse to catch in the world. So I was trying to corner her. All of a sudden, I heard this noise coming, which I knew right away what it was. And I mean, I just about froze. And I looked up, and here he was coming, you know, just like slow motion, 1 foot at a time like that, and bellowing like the devil. So there was an old horse inside the corral where mine was. I was lucky I grabbed that horse, and out I went. And as I went by, that bull took after me, and he run me clear up into the barnyard where the cows came in. I jumped off and climbed up a ladder into the haymow. And he's standing down there pawing the earth and a bellowing. Boss come around the corner, and he says, what are you doing up there? That bull chased me up here. Oh, he said, what's the matter with you? So he went in there, and it wasn't any longer than I could take to tell you this little bit about him. He was right up beside me. And so this bull, then he stayed down there, you know. So finally we went through the barn and down inside the haymow. And he says, boy, said, we're going to have to get rid of that fellow. So weirdest things happen. He had a little, what they call a 1-ton Model T truck, which in today's sizes would be about 1/8 of a ton, maybe, or a quarter. Had little kind of sideboards on the side. So we got that bull inside the barn and backed his truck up to it and opened the gate, getting into the truck. And you never saw such a circus in your life when he hit that truck. He bounced that truck all over the yard out there. And then we were trying to figure out how to get him out of that thing there. So finally, he tipped it over on the side, and then he fell out of there. So the boss went in and called Armored Meat Company in Spokane. Asked if they had a rig to haul a big bull. Oh, yes, they had a rig. So he said, send him out to get it. So we sent him out there. Never forget that little guy. He weren't a very big fellow, but he backed this truck up. He had solid boards on the side all the way around it. So he opened the gate and the barn, and that old bull just charged out into that truck there, you know. And this guy had a center divider that hung to one side. I tell you, I never seen a guy work so fast as he did. He grabbed that divider and a rope, block and tackle on this side, and had that bull cinched up in there before he could even begin to think about turning around. And he lodged him into that corner so that sucker couldn't move any direction. And off he went down the road, no problem whatsoever. And I think that bull went out about 2,100 pounds. I mean, he was one big sucker. I'll get back to you. Well, howdy, we're back again. Let's see, where did I leave off? I guess I was up there on that ranch, and we just got rid of that old bull. Well, that wasn't the only fun they had that summer up there. We used to go down to the lake, go swimming quite a bit after work, kind of like kids do, you know. So I was out raking hay one day, and I had this old team of gray horses out there, good old honest team, you know. Had a dump rake. I was going along the edge of the lake there, you know, raking this hay up. So all of a sudden I thought, geez, I think I better let these horses rest a little bit, and I'll walk over here and see if any fish in the lake or whatever. So I stopped,
tied the lines up there, and I stepped out behind the team there. Went about 4 or 5 steps, and at the corner of my eye, I seen this team take off, run. Why? I don't have any idea. They'd never done anything like that before. Good old team. So I raced back there, and I tried to catch the lines right behind the horses. But that outside wheel on this big old rake run over my foot, drug me down underneath, and that team by that time was on a dead run. And I am under this rake spinning like the hay does, there. And my thoughts were that my legs would get in that wheel, in the spokes of the wheel, and tear my legs off. So I was hollering, "Whoa." That didn't do any good. They didn't hear that at all. And I was just spinning in there, and it seemed like for the longest time, probably wasn't all that long, but finally the rake hit a bump, and like some of those old dump rakes would do, it tripped itself and let me go out. And so, of course, when I came out, and the team kept going, eventually ran up to the barn and stopped. But I didn't have a piece of hide on my back that wasn't a scab from the stubbles in there that was tearing the flesh as I was going around. And it took almost the longest time to heal that up. My back looked more like hamburger than it did a back. But that's just one of the experiences. Another experience I had on that same ground out there, that same hay meadow, boss's wife was also raking one day, and he had a little team of mules, little span of mules, nice little team, and she was driving that team raking hay. And I was over on the other end of the field raking, and I looked around, and all of a sudden, I didn't see her anywhere. And this area was big enough so that I could see any place on the field, but she was not out there anywhere. So I went down investigating to see, and finally I heard her holler. And there was thick brush on one side of that field there that wasn't plowed or anything, it was just all brush. But what happened is that she ran over a hive of bees in the ground, and they took after them mules and her. And of course, them mules, they're pretty smart. And they knew that if they drug that thing into the brush far enough, they'd scrape them bees off of them. And that's exactly what they did. They went in until they couldn't pull that thing any further into there, until they got stuck, and there they were. So I got down there, and of course she was all upset about it. Well, we had to go up to the barn and get the axes and come back down there and chop that brush out and back that team and that rake out of there. And darn if we didn't get her out of there, and she started again raking, and hadn't went 100 yards until the same darn thing happened again. And in she went into that brush again, and another 2-3 hours digging her out. That's just some of the experiences I had on that stock ranch there. And then when the summer was over, and I made a few bucks, I came home again. I think I had $35 in my pocket. And my uncle, Dad's brother, had left a little 1923 Ford Model T pickup that he'd left at our place. And I was getting to age there that cars was kind of interesting to me, So I asked him one day if he would sell that Ford, and he said, yes, he would. And I said, well, what do you want for it? He said, well, how much money have you got? I said, well, I got $35. He says, that's exactly what it'll take to buy that Ford. So that was my first automobile, was the 1923 Ford. But I'll back up a ways before we get into that part of it again. Getting back to the cowboy stage in which I was interested in.
as always. And I knew you had to ride some horses, break a few horses, to be really into this. So I took out the farm plugs that we had there that didn't ride and worked on some of them. And I was getting along pretty good. I thought I was on the way to being a bronc rider, there. But I can see now that it wasn't all that great, it wasn't all that bad. So I went up to neighbors one day, and he heard that I was doing a little riding. And he says, I got a horse out here. He says, you'd like to try him. He says, I think you might have a little problem with him. Oh, that's great. I'll try him. So I went out there in the big old raw bone Roman nose horse out there, And I should have known by the looks of him, that he was one of them kind that go up in the east and come down in the west. But we rigged him out there, and I boarded up on that dude, and out we went. Well, I done pretty good until he done something. I'm telling you, I went up so high, I thought I was going to run out of oxygen. And when I came down, I didn't land like a cat on my feet. I landed on this shoulder, and my neck just kind of separated everything in here. And I'm paying for it today. That's one of the places that hurt on me today after all these 70 years. So I kind of thought at the time, I don't know, that's a pretty hard way to go. I think I'm going to try something else that the Cowboys do there. So we had a ranch up on the top end of the foothills up there, the old Johnson Ranch. And they had quite a bit of stock up there. Horses that kind of run by themselves, they're colts they never broke, so forth. Some of us young hopefuls would go up there and get a hold of someone that would ride some of them horses. So the first steer that I ever dogged or steer wrestled was up on that ranch up there. I'd heard about steer wrestling and never really seen any of it. So I can remember instead of a hazer like they have to hold that steer into you there, I ran this steer down a fence line. It dropped off on him and got a hold of him all right. And then I didn't know really what to do after I got a hold of him. I didn't dare let go. So I guess I done the natural thing, just dug my heels in until I got him stopped, and then twist his neck over and so him. And I kind of liked that. I kind of thought that's what I would kind of like to do, more as a sport. We weren't in rodeos at that time. I didn't know what rodeos really were. Up in that country, we didn't have them. I sure enough didn't get far enough away to get used to those things. But we'd get together on Sundays, go up to Johnson Ranch and ride steers or even the old buck sheep they had or whatever we took a notion to do. And we had a lot of fun in it. I enjoyed doing that, and so did the other boys there. So then, on back down home again, some of the things that I did, in addition to what I've told you already, I wanted a bicycle. I seen a bicycle and I thought, gee, that'd be the great thing to have. Even though all the roads were gravel, and there was no hard tops or anything to ride on, I forget how I did it, but somewhere or another I was able to swap, barter, trade or something for a bicycle. And then I thought, oh boy, this is really great. And I'll never forget, I remember this song, this tune that came out at the time that I got that bicycle, and it was Alice Blue Gown. It was a very popular tune at that time, and although I couldn't sing, I could whistle a little bit, and I'd go up down the road when I could ride that bike, whistling that Alice Blue Gown. And to this day, if I hear Alice Blue Gown, right back up, riding that bike up and down the roads up there. But even going to school, I was just about half a mile from the schoolhouse. went to a little 2-room country school that had the first 4 grades in the lower, what we call the little room, and then the 5th, the 8th, the upper room. And I remember my mother took me down there my first day, and she got a hold of my cousin, Henry Lunenburg, asked if he would watch over me till I got used to things, find out where the toilet was, and so the big kid didn't beat the hell out of me. And so he did, and so that's the way I got started in my 3 R's. I think there was 5 in my class, 4 boys and 1 girl, and we went through the 8 years together. And sad to say now, I think I'm the only one left of that class. We had a get together here some years back, and I saw one of my classmates that I hadn't seen in over 50 some years. It was good to see him. We really had a good time. Getting back to this school, when I went to school there, it was during the Great Depression, when you had a lot of nothing, and everybody was in the same boat. Money was scarce. Dad raised a lot of potatoes. In fact, he was called the Spud King at one time because he used to raise as many as 100 acres of spuds. And he had the spuds but didn't have a market for them. And many a time in the spring we had to haul those spuds out and they dump them out because they spoiled, you know. But getting back to the school days, I think I was about 13, maybe 14. And I had been blessed with the croup. Anybody, you know what the croup is like. It's something that grabs you in the wintertime and you cough and it comes from down here and your throat all tightens up. God, I used to be scared to go to bed at night. Many's the time my sister Edith would run in and wake Dad up and tell him that I was choking to death in there, and he would run out to the pump, chip ice off, pack my throat with ice there. That was that way just about every winter. So finally there came a deal along that the old county doctor said that he would come out to the schoolhouse and take out the tonsils, which they figured was my problem. If enough of the kids would come out, they'd come out and do it. So they talked it over, and I think they got about 14 kids signed up, which I was one, for $5 a piece. And this doctor and his nurse came out. They shoved a couple of desks together. That was the operating table. And they had these cans of ether, looked like 6-pack beer. And my dad was the anesthesiast. And they had a tea strainer with some gauze over the top that they'd stick over your nose. And then Dad'd stand there pouring that damn ether into the thing there. God, I never took such a trip in my life when I was going under. I'll tell you, it was an experience I would never forget my whole lifetime. I had the worst buzzing sound in my head, and things were spinning, and like I was strapped onto a huge dynamo and then tipped upside down and then turned that thing loose. Terrible, terrible experience. You know, I even hate to think about it anymore. But anyway, they got the job done. I suppose as they cut the tonsils out, they throw them out the window or whatever. But I was the 14th one. Why I ever stayed for that mess, I don't know, but I did. So that night, they bedded us all down right there in the school, and next morning we was all still alive, so he took each one of us home then. Well, they all come through pretty good shape except myself, and I guess I was a bleeder, because I just bled and bled and bled until I couldn't lift my head off the pillow anymore, and they finally got the nurse to come out, and she done whatever and got that stopped, and then I convalesced, and finally after some time came out all right. But I've got to tell you, the best part was I never had the croup after that again. So it was worth all that we went through there. But there was a lot of experience we had. You wonder what we did for fun. Well, in the wintertime, right behind school was a nice long hill. So we would take our sleds to school, and then during recess at noon, we'd slide up and down that uh, hill there. And that was fun, and we enjoyed doing it. And then on the school grounds, they had some swings and rings that you could go out as like some of these exercise deals that people have today. So it wasn't all that dull, there. And then some of the kids that came far away uh, rode horseback or drove a horse and buggy, whichever the case may be, and they had a little barn on the school ground there where they stabled those horses during the day while the kids were there. And then probably on a Sunday,
Well, we're back again here now. We'll try it again and see what's happening. I was telling you a little bit about the school business down there. Another thing that comes to my mind, when I was about 8 years old, I guess, there was a fellow came out one day and offered to bring a radio out and set it up so we could all listen to it. And a radio. The heck is a radio? Never heard of one. So I was trying to figure out how a radio could work with just a wire that went across the up above. But this fella came out one afternoon there, and he put a couple of poles up the end of the building with a wire that stretched across. I believe it is even a copper wire, with the lead in that went down into the big room, into the window there. And then he brought a radio in. It's about yay long, about that square. And it had about 9 dials across the front of it there. And then it had a pretty good sized speaker, probably about that big, that set alongside of it with a wire that plugged into the radio. Then the antenna lead, he connected that on the back. And then there was a couple of lead-ins that he uses a storage battery, absolutely similar to a car battery. In fact, you could interchange it. And so we all went home from school that afternoon, and that evening, I think it was about 6:30 or 7, everybody, it was almost everybody in the country came down, because that was a big thing. So the fellow got in there, and he started in, he turned the power on this thing, and boy, it started to squeal and howl and squawk along there, and I thought to myself, boy, if this is radio, I don't know if it's going to be any good or not. But finally, he kept turning those dials and working with it, and he got the station, KHQ, which was the first radio station in Spokane. And so we listened to about a half hour of the news, and everybody was on the edge of their seats, just really taking this in, because this was big stuff. I think, really, when I think back on it, that it had more of an impact on me than the first television that I saw in 1952. But that radio was a thrill I'll never, ever forget. So after that, then a lot of people wanted to have a radio in their home so that they could know what was going on in the rest of the country. So they started buying up these sets and installing them in their home. Wherever you seen a house that had a big antenna running and down, you knew they had a radio. There was one big problem with those. The storage batteries only lasted a short while. I forget, maybe if you use it conservatively, you probably could get 3 or 4 evenings use out of it without the battery going dead. And when the battery was dead, that meant you had to either take it in and have it charged, or take the one out of the car and put the dead one in there and get the car started to charge it up. And of course, like a lot of guys did, their ideas were good, but it'd end up with two dead batteries, and that was a problem. One of the solutions that came along was my Uncle Jake down the line had a windmill that pumped his water. And so they came up with a little generator, wasn't very big, little thing, and he mounted that up and run it with a belt off of the windmill as it was pumping the water. It was also charging his battery, and that worked pretty good. And then there was another little deal that I got hold of. It was called a crystal set. It was just a little bit of a thing, probably no bigger than 4 inches by 4 inches. Had a bunch of coils of wiring in it, and had a little crystal, which is not much bigger than my thumbnail, that was mounted in this framework. Then there was a wire that came up with a point on it that set down on that crystal. And in order to use it, you had to, of course, have an antenna hooked from the outside, just like a big radio. But you had earphones that plugged into this little set because it was not strong enough to play a speaker. So when you got it all set up there, then you'd take that cat whisper and you'd keep moving it around on there, and pretty soon, sooner or later, you'd find the right spot, and then this radio would play for you. You could sit there and listen to it. My dad used to like sit in the evening and listen to the news that came over KHQ. And then when I could get it away from him, I would listen to whatever came along. It didn't make any difference. It was something to do. This is progress along the line there. It's a big thing for out there in our area where we hadn't seen or had anything like that before. But in getting to the homes, we had no electricity at that time. We left that area in 1934, and I think it was probably along about 37 before the rural electrification came through and started stringing electric lines all through the country. Then eventually every farmhouse had it, which was a good thing. We didn't have electricity in our home until we moved back into the Spokane area. My mother's first time was 1938. Like I said, not many places had plumbing in it. There was no electric motors to run pumps or so forth. So you carried a bucket of water in, and then you carried the wastewater out. And that was the way it was with most of them. Those that did have water in the house were generally located over a cistern or a spring, and then you had a little pitcher pump on the kitchen drain board there, and you could pump and get the water out. But then it was a case of hauling wastewater out and throwing it out. It seems so simple now, and I could kick myself that I didn't fix my mother's kitchen up with at least a drain that run outside. Like I say, it seems so simple now, but at that time, we never thought about it. We didn't know about it, and so that's how it went. We had a well outside of our house there, close to the kitchen, and that well, believe me, would go dry every summer. It seemed like we had real hard winters, lots of snow and blizzards, and then real damn hot summers there. And we had another well down below the house there that was a good year round. So that meant we'd have to haul that water from the lower well up to the house, which we hauled in a barrel, mounted on a kind of a sled-like contraption. We call it a go devil, of which you'd hitch a horse onto and pull that thing down, and then hand over hand with a bucket, fill that barrel up, and then drag it back up to the house. And I don't know why, but it just seemed like that damn barrel was forever empty. And even for my mother, she hated to say, well, Dean, the water's all gone now, could you go get another one? It was a chore to do that. Talk about chores, it just seemed like there's never any end to chores. After school, we got home and there was chores. Everything on the place that ate had to be fed. And the cow, we always had one or two cows, had to be milked. I don't know, that seemed to fall into my territory for some reason. So we'd have to go down there and milk the cows. So there wasn't too much time after school. It almost took from that time till dark to get the chores all done. Then I remember we'd have to go down with the lantern and milk that cow's milk. And I always kind of teased my older sister Edith to get her to go with me, but she didn't want to, and I was about half scared to go down there. But my mother would get after her, and so we'd go down. She'd stand there while I was milking the damn cow. Then after I got through, I'd go out the door, and then I'd point at something, and I'd run to the house and leave her stand there, which wasn't a very good trick. I'm not very proud of that. So she said that that was the last time she'd ever go, but the next night it was the same thing again. So that's how that went. Then on Saturdays, you'd think Saturdays would be a good time to just play and have a lot of fun. Well, I tell you, there was more chores to do on Saturday. My dad raised chickens, and he had about 1,500 layers. We had a big building down below above the root cellar. And that was all made up for these chickens. You had laying nests along one whole wall there. And then they had the roost back in there and these water fountains. And there again, and pack all that water from the well up hill to that chicken house. So those chickens would have plenty of water to drink. Boy, in the wintertime, that'd freeze up almost as soon as you got it done. What a pain. But on Saturdays, it was my job to clean the darn chicken. And we had a big wheelbarrow, and these roosts where the chickens roosted at night. I'd have to pull those roosts up in the air and then kind of chisel that chicken manure out there and scrape it all into the wheelbarrow. And got that all done, then I had to clean the whole inside out, haul that all outside, and then put fresh straw all around. It just seemed like that was a every Saturday deal. And so it didn't seem like I had too much time to be a kid. It seemed like I grew up pretty fast. In fact, at 10 years old, I was doing man's work. I'd be following that foot burner, that plow around the field there. I guess the only reason I enjoyed doing that is because I really did enjoy and liked horses and liked to work with horses. And I spent a lot of time on that. I remember the first horses my dad had, as I remember as a little kid, was a black and a gray. And then one day he came home, he bought a new team, a young team of one was a sorrel and the other was a chestnut. Old Bird and Doll was their names. And that was a big deal. Gosh, that was a nice team, there. But they weren't really matched right. Bird was, of course, by far the best of the two. And the old Doll seemed like she developed problems. She had a spasm on her leg and eventually, went kind of lame. So I forget down the road a ways, she gave up the ghost, and so he had to get another. And an old Bird, I think, outlived at least 6 or 8 mates. And Dad would pick up a mate for her in the spring. I don't know, we had Mike and John and Tom and, gosh, a whole bunch of them. But the old Bird seemed to outlive all of them. She was a tremendous horse. She went about 1,500 pounds. But she was a good horse. But I got interested now, and I kind of wanted to get my own team. And so I knew what I wanted. And had a neighbor down the line, old John Brennan was his name. He's come past our place, going from one place he had to another. And he had this ball-faced strawberry roan with 4 white socks and black mane and tail. It just absolutely took my eye, you know. I just wanted that horse, you know, there. And she was leading the pack all the time. And I knew that she would be a terrific lead horse. So I stopped old John out there one day and asked him if he'd sell that strawberry roan horse up there. Why, hell no, he says, I wouldn't sell that horse. What would I do without that? Well, I thought maybe you might get it. No, I said, I might. Don't bother. So about a month went by, and I saw him again. I said, John, I called him Mr. Brennan. I said, did you decide to sell that horse yet? He said, no, and don't bother me anymore. Well, another one went by, and I saw him on the road one day, and I said, how about that horse? You going to sell me that horse today? And he said, doggone it, kid. He says, I guess the only way I'm going to get rid of you is to sell you that horse. And I said, well, that's fine. I won't bother you. He says, what do you take for it? And he said, I got to have $40 for that horse. Good price. Good horse for that. So I bought that horse from him. I suppose I had saved up a little money through selling pigs or calves or whatever. I don't know. A long time ago. But I bought that horse from him, and then I started running the wheels looking for a mate for that horse. Because I wanted a lead team. I wanted a little more team. She went about 1,200 pounds, which is just about right. My gosh, I ran across a little bay mare one day down at the Indian reservation. And there was an old horse jockey. He wasn't Indian, but he lived on the reservation. Old Herb Distel, I think was his name. And I saw this little mare out in the pasture there. So I stopped, asked him if that horse was for sale. And he said, yeah. He said he'd sell it. So I kind of looked her over, and I kind of thought she'd be a pretty good mate for that other one I had at home there. So he wanted $35 for her. I bought that mare and took her home. And, well, I tell you, they worked good. There was a good team. I used them as lead horses on anything that I needed to string them out of 4-up hitch on there. They were really good. I like to cut hay with them because they'd be clicking along, and they could tell the sound of the pulling machine if it got to hanging up, working a little too hard. They just step right up, you know, and pick up the pace, and then they'd settle back down again. So I had a team, and Dad had a team. We kept 4 horses on the place, and oftentimes when harvest time comes, we'd have to have another team. I remember one time we were digging spuds and needed another team, and there was an auction sale down the road there. And so my dad went down there to see what was there. They had a team of old grays down there, good old honest team. Had a few years on to them, but they were good horses. And my gosh, they put that team up for bid, and they couldn't get a bid on them, you know, there. And finally, the auctioneer said, well, I'll sell you one with a choice of the other. And he says, who'll give me $3? Dad said, I'll give you 3. And so he says, which one do you want? Dad says, I'll take both of them. So he took them and brought them home. And we done our whole harvest that fall there with that team of horses. They were a good team. So anyway, I think maybe I mentioned to you some while back, I got things kind of mixed up on this deal, but I think you remember I told you I bought that little 23 Model T Ford pickup truck for my uncle. I was 12 years old when I bought that. And primarily I bought that truck to use to haul water to the house. I wouldn't have to harness up and drag a horse around, which I did. I loaded the barrel in the back of that, back down to the well and fill that up, take it up to the house there. So one day, I forget who it was, somebody had a water pump they had given me just for taking it.
So I, oh boy, this will be great. So I took it down to the well and hooked it up, but it didn't have anything to run the thing with. Just like I said, we didn't have any electricity. I didn't have any gas engines or anything. So what I did, I had an extra rim for the wheel on that Model T Ford. And so I bolted it onto the side, and it got me kind of a narrow belt. And I put a belt from that rim back to the water pump there. And then I jacked that wheel up and started that old Ford in and put it into gear. And the wheel was turning, and the water pump was pumping, and my barrel was getting filled. That sounded like kind of a funny deal at the time, but boy, I tell you, that in my mind, that was progress. I was doing something there, easing the burden, so to speak, there. But this is just some of the things, like the washing machine. I remember my mother, the first washing machine she had was a scrub board, about this wide and about that long, had all kinds of ridges on it. She'd stand over a tub of water with that thing and literally pump those clothes clean on that washboard there. And then bring them out, then put them into another tub there of water and rinse them out, bring them out, and then go out, hang them up. But even prior to that, she had the big boiler. We call it a boiler. It's about this long, about this high. You fill it with water, put it on the kitchen stove to heat the water up and get that water hot enough so they could really wash the clothes. Which was a hard way for the women to go in those days. It was hard work. But one day my dad came home with what he called a washing machine. And it stood on 4 legs, and it had a round barrel on it, like a half a barrel. And the barrel type, the body was wood, like slats on the barrel. Then up in the middle came a deal with kind of an agitator on the thing. And he was looking it over, and off to the side came a little handle that come up. So I went over to see what that was. Pushed it. As you push it back and forth, the agitator would go like this, This was more progress, for the women. It made things a whole lot easier. Instead of standing there pumping that thing, just stand there and work that thing. And that went on for a while until one day somebody came up with the idea and put a little 1-cylinder gas engine on this washing machine, and you could start down and start that thing, and then turn the lever, and it would wash the clothes in there, and then you'd stop it, turn another lever, and run them through the wringer. Well, boy, I tell you, this was progress. There were so many things that come along. It'd take me a week to tell you of all the progress that we had there, but things little by little come along to make things easier for the women folks and the men folks too, as far as that goes. Like the machinery that came along, updated on that, and the automobiles, they started in, the first cars that we had were old magneto type cars with a hand crank on them. And you'd have to stand there and choke the thing and crank it, hope that it goes. Lots of times it wouldn't go, and then there was a problem there. All these things were building up and coming along there. Just like with the automobile, the first self-starter that they put on them. But well, I tell you, that was really an improvement, because you jump in and turn the key and step down on a little button there, and the able engine would turn over, and pretty soon it'd be running. So they came out, they had put a little starter on and a little generator to keep the battery charged. And I guess things just kept going and improving, coming along. One of the things I remember that I did, I was about 16 years old. My dad had bought a 25 Oldsmobile touring car with side curtains and a rag top, simply because my mother said she would not ride in a car that was totally surrounded by glass. She was afraid anything happened, they'd be cut to pieces. So he bought that one. Then many years down the road, I was in town one day and I bought a 25 Oldsmobile two-door sedan, $35. And I drove it home and it run, but it run okay, but it wasn't running as good as the one Dad had. So Dad and Mother decided one time they had to go on a trip somewhere and be gone for 3, 4, 5 days. So while they were gone, I came up with the idea of changing the bodies on those two cars. In other words, I backed one of them down into kind of like a big machine shed and overhead hoist and stuff. So I unbolted the body off of one of them and then hung it up. Then unbolted the body off the other one. Then changed the chassis over and put them back on there, which was quite a job, but it seemed to go. I kind of had an aptitude for mechanics, and I learned process elimination, trial and error, school of hard knocks. But anyway, it worked. So I had that all done when my folks came home, and so I put this two-door into Dad's garage. So he came home and he went out to get in his car and he looked in there and he seen that two-door and he marched right back in the house. And he said, I don't know how many times I've told you to keep your car out of my garage. He said, I don't want it in there. And I felt good about that. I said, well, Dad, that's not my car in there. That's yours. He said, it isn't. Like hell. He said, that's that sedan of yours in there. So then I told him what I had done, and he couldn't believe that. And he really didn't know for sure. But anyhow, he went out, made a drive with it, came back. Of course, he was happy with that. But that's just some of the things that I did as a kid, there, that I was growing up. Seemed like if I'd only been so smart then, and could seen ahead, I could have been a half a millionaire today by just picking up the old cars, buggies, and wagons that were discarded in the country there when I was a kid there. I had several buggies on the place, and I used to hitch the horse up to and go somewhere. But only kept them, and kept them undercover. They're worth a good buggy today, a minimum of $1,000. But I didn't see it that way. Same thing with cars. Had access to cars. I went one time down to a neighbor down there, and he says, God, he said, I'd sure like to sell that car out there. He says, well, it's a 26 Model T Ford Coupe. He said, yep. And I said, what's wrong with it? He said, well, he says, there's really anything wrong with it. He says, it runs good. He said, the only thing it needs is a battery. So I said, well, Joe, what do you want for that Ford? He said, I'd take $275 for that. I said, just get it out of here. So I said, Joe, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll be back for $275 and take that car off your hands. So I went home and I got my piggy bank. I got $2.75, not $275, but $2.75. Took a battery along, went down there and bought that Ford from you. And it was one of the good Model Ts that I ever owned. It ran good. It had all the glass, good tires on it. I run that for quite a number of years. And I might tell you a little story. Happened to me one time as a young teenager. I was at a dance one night, and this other fellow that I know lived on Pleasant Prairie. We got to talking about our cars. And I suppose I was bragging a little bit, and so was he. So I said, Gene, I'll tell you what, I'll trade you unsight and unseen cars. He said, how do you figure that? I said, that's that. I'll trade you sight unseen. He says, okay, where will we do it? He says, tomorrow night at dark, about 8 o'clock, I'll meet you at the schoolyard down there. I'll drive mine up, you drive yours. I'll walk over and take yours, you take mine. I guess she said it's a deal. So we shook hands. And the next night, we were down there. We swapped cars, unsight and unseen, till we got them home and looked down the next day. I don't think either one of us made out like a bandit on it there, but it was something that we did. It was kind of a fun deal. Which are just some of the things. There was about 6 of us boys, all about the same age, that lived in that area there. And somewhere or another, we got the idea. Each one of us picked up an old Model T Ford that had been discarded by somebody, stripped the bodies all off of them, go down to the frame, and we cut the frame on the front and undersling. We call it underslinging the frame. We'd undersling it down below the front axle there, and then the same thing we dropped the back down, so we only had about 3-4 inches of clearance under the oil pan. So we put a board across the frame there, and then set the steering wheel down, mounted it, and used the gas tank as the backrest, and that's all we had on them. There wasn't any wiring or anything. It was just everything was direct hookup. And my mother used to call those spiders. And I'll tell you, on a weekend or Sunday when we could get together, I mean, the natives absolutely were afraid to come out on the roads because we'd go up down those roads, you know, there, and you could turn them and slide like that, but you're no weight overhead at all, you know. You could just do a lot of things. We could race those things and just have a lot of fun. One time, a guy down the valley gave me a body, racing body, for a Model T Ford. I thought that was really going to be great. So I got that home and I mounted it onto this Model T Ford. But it seemed like it was too much trouble on there. I preferred just the spider thing there. So that's the way that went. But I had quite a few different cars. I'd like to have some of them back now that we had at the time. Like some of those with like a Buick Straight 8 or a Packard car. Auburn's cars, Veely. Gosh, all those big old cars used to have big 6-cylinder engines in them. Many of them had straight 8 cylinders. You know, there was also a V12 and a V16 in the Cadillac version. What a hunk of iron that was, you know. But that's the way that things went, and you could pick up a car in those days for not very much money because there wasn't very much money around. But it was a learning experience. I never did have a license on a car. I don't know how long. In those days, if you had a little pickup, you could use either a car license or a truck license. So I'd take one or the other off my dad's car and put on mine to do a little running around. But we didn't have much problem that way. We go up and down the road without license plate. The driver's license, we never had driver's license. And when we were learning to drive, the big test was when we could drive a car from foothills down around in the city of Spokane and drive out. Then you were a qualified driver. Because out there in the country, you know, wasn't any, but you get down, even as small as Spokane was at the time, it was something to be able to drive those streets down there and get back without any problem. Getting back to my license plates one time, I'd taken the license off of Dad's passenger car, put it on mine, forgot to put it back on. I was sitting in school one day there, and all of a sudden the thought hit, oh, God, Dad and Mom went to town today, and I forgot the license plate back on. And I believe I died 1,000 deaths that afternoon. And they were late coming home, which made it even worse. You know, I could visualize them getting caught up by the police in town for that. Maybe you put the, I thought the worst, you know, there. Gosh, I couldn't hardly wait. Finally, they came home, and I said, "Did you have any trouble today?" No, everything went well. No problems, nothing. No. Why should we? You know, Dad, I forgot to put the license plate back on your car, so you drove her downtown back up. Oh my God, I never realized that. But he says, it's probably a good thing I didn't, because if I'd noticed it downtown, I'd probably be going through back alleys and everything else, trying to avoid him, and we would run right smack into a trap. Anyway, that's how the story went. So I think at this point, I'll do like the big boys say on the radio or television. I'm going to take a break right now, and then well, we're back again. Had a little lunch there. Feel pretty good. Snowing today. Got about 3 inches of snow out here and more coming. But that's the way it goes. So getting back a little bit more into my younger years, of which I promised to tell you a little bit about. We didn't have too much money in those days to buy things. So we did quite a lot of trading back and forth. I know one time a neighbor of ours up there named Raleigh Lindell had a saddle that I wanted. God, I just wanted that saddle the worst way. And it was kind of a neat saddle. It had saddlebags on the side all covered with long bear hide on there. So I started dickering with Raleigh for that saddle. He wanted some money for it, which I didn't have. So we bartered back and forth and digged around there. And finally, I traded him a young heifer that I was raising for a cow. So I got the saddle that I wanted, that I used a lot. Enjoyed that saddle, really liked it. So I had that, and I kept it with me. Oh gosh, from that time until I finally, my wife made a coat quite a bad one year, and guy come along and wanted to buy that saddle, and I did. I sold him the saddle. I didn't regret selling the saddle to buy her a coat, but I sure kicked myself afterward that I sold that saddle. A good saddle is like a good pair of gloves. Just because it's a saddle doesn't mean it's going to fit you, or doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable. That saddle was a good saddle. It was a good comfortable saddle. I one time picked up a saddle for my son John. It was an oil. Well, we're back for another little session here. Hope you aren't getting tired of it. I was talking to you and telling you about that last saddle that I had, that oil-treated saddle. It's a really good saddle. You could throw it in the creek overnight and bring it up and shake it out at dawn. Great saddle to use in the hunting when you got into wet weather, but damn most uncomfortable saddle I think I ever had in my life. I've got a saddle here that I've had close to 40 years now. It's a real good saddle. It's a Saddle King of Texas. Got a full rawhide tree under it, double rigging under it. Got semi-bucking rolls. This is to my choosing. I bought this when I was teaching my kids to ride when they were younger. This comes in real handy to keep you in the saddle. As you can see, the leather, the sheepskin on this is just as good as the day I bought it. You can tell the seat, double padded seat on it there. The leather looks like new because I take care of it. Every fall, when I was through with it, I'd take it down the basement, I'd go over it, I'd clean the whole thing with leather new and put it all back, and even the strings, you know, are good on it there. It's just an excellent saddle. I wouldn't sell that saddle because when I go riding, when I own a saddle, I want a comfortable saddle. And to me, maybe nobody else, but to me, this is a comfortable saddle. It fits me good. It fits a horse good. I always put a
blanket on the horse first, usually a wool blanket, and then a horsehair pad over the top of that before I ever set this sheepskin down onto that horse there. So there's usually never any sweat or anything gets up onto the sheepskin, and that's why after 40 years, it's damn near as good as new. But I really like this saddle, and like I say, I wouldn't part with it until I'm gone. Then what happens to it, I don't know. But anyway, as long as I'm able to ride and do ride, that's going to be the one. And I've also got a couple of favorite bridles that I might tell you about, as long as we're into this here. This is a bitless, no bit in the horse's mouth. Bitless Kelly, they call it. And just about all the horses I ride, I use this here on, preferably over the type like this one here that has the roller bit in it there. It's got to be a pretty fractious horse or one that's pretty damn hard to control before I go to this type of a bit here. I really prefer the other one, and there isn't too many that I found that I have any problem controlling. Once in a while I will. I had a horse one time, I went on a trail ride with him, and he was a good horse all the time, but this day he was kind of ornery. And we went up on a trail ride with about 50, 60 other riders. And it was coming around this Mount Spokane area. And he absolutely, everybody else rode 18 miles, I rode 36. 18 this way and 18 like this. He jigged every step of the way. He would not change. Couldn't dock him out of it. So we come clear around this mountain. We're heading back down to where the trailers and trucks was. And he just took off on a run. He was running away with it. And I seesawed those reins. I done everything I could. And I'm fast running into these people that are all over the road down there, unsaddling and getting ready to go home. And this dude, I mean, he just flat out moved. So I had only one choice to do, and that was to crawl up here, reach down over his head, and get his hold of his nostrils and shut his wind off, which I did. And then that brought him to a screeching halt right there. If it wasn't for that, I'm sure he would never have stopped, and people would have been flying every direction. But that's the way it goes. When you're out with these things, anything can happen, and does. Here's a pair of spurs that I have. If you could see them, they're as dull as anything. I don't like sharp spurs. I never did. I don't like see anybody use them on a horse. If you got a horse, you got to dig him so that you raise blood on him every time. That's no good. In fact, they used to kid me about these here. They say that these rowels are so big that if I ever got bucked off, all they'd have to do is get me under the armpits and roll me out of wherever there. But I wear them at times. Like I say, they're there if I need them. If I don't, I don't. And that's about the way it goes. Anyway, I still like, at this age, 79 now here, 80 this few months, still like horses, still like to ride horses, still like good horses. I drive 40 miles to see a good horse. But anyway,